The day I discovered Robert's secret life, I was sorting through boxes in the attic. 50 years of marriage crammed into dusty, forgotten corners. Amid the clutter, I came across a phone bill. There, among the usual charges, was a series of calls to a Philadelphia number I didn't recognize. Weekly calls, sometimes lasting for hours, stretching back months. I could have easily ignored it, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. Later that evening, when Robert was out at his investment club meeting, I picked up the phone and dialed the number. A woman's voice answered, warm, friendly, almost too familiar. Wilson Residence, she said. It was my last name, our last name. But this wasn't my home. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. The weight of the truth hit me like a physical blow the moment I discovered the phone bill. The unfamiliar charges, the strange names, and the sudden realization that my husband of 50 years had been leading a double life shattered everything I thought I knew about Robert. My entire world, built on the foundation of our shared history, came crumbling down. How had I been so blind? The silence in the house was deafening after that discovery. The bill, a simple slip of paper, carried with it the devastation of 1,000 lies. I confronted Robert. His evasions and guilt-ridden answers only deepened the hole in my chest. His confession, half-hearted and reluctant, was more a series of justifications than true remorse. But it was clear, the man I had spent decades with was not the man I thought I knew. Robert had not just betrayed me emotionally. He had deceived everyone, including his own family, by leading multiple lives with other women, each relationship built on lies as intricate and deliberate as the one we shared. And as I sat across from him, hearing about Catherine in Boston, Eleanor in Philadelphia, and the carefully constructed facade he'd maintained for years, something inside me broke. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the total collapse of everything we had built together. That evening, I sat alone in our living room, staring at the familiar walls that had witnessed years of our lives. I had loved Robert. I had been devoted to him. And yet, in the blink of an eye, the person I thought I had loved became a stranger. The anger I had felt earlier slowly turned into numbness. I didn't know who to be anymore, what role to play in this new, fractured reality. I couldn't stay there. Not in that house, not in that town, surrounded by the ghosts of a marriage I could no longer recognize. It became clear that my only option, my only escape, was to leave. To distance myself from the wreckage he had caused. And so, I made the decision to go, to take a break, to figure out who I was outside of being Robert's wife, outside of the life I had lived for so long. I packed a suitcase, leaving behind the trappings of a life that was no longer mine. The next morning, I boarded a plane to Florence, a city I had always dreamed of visiting but had never considered for anything more than a brief vacation. Yet, in that moment of uncertainty, Florence represented something more, an opportunity for reinvention. The flight was long, but it passed in a blur. I wasn't sure what awaited me, only that it had to be different. I had no real plan, no clear direction, just the certainty that I needed a fresh start, a way to escape the suffocating grip of my old life. My daughter, Jennifer, was supportive but concerned. I had left behind everything I knew, everything that had once defined me. When I arrived in Florence, I felt a strange sense of calm despite the chaos swirling within me. The apartment I had rented was small but cozy, tucked in a quiet neighborhood away from the tourist crowds. As I unpacked my bags, I allowed myself a few moments of grief, of anger, of confusion. I let the emotions flood over me, not knowing how to make sense of it all. But after a while, the weariness of the journey took over, and I moved forward. I set up the apartment as best as I could, made a bed with Gabriella's linens, and ventured to the local market for essentials. The simple act of buying coffee, bread, and cheese grounded me in a way I hadn't expected. The unfamiliarity of it all, Florence, the people, the language, was oddly comforting. That evening, as I sat on my small balcony with a glass of local wine, I watched the sunset over the city. The sounds of Florence floated up to me, snippets of Italian conversation, the hum of scooters, the distant notes of music. The city felt alive in a way that was completely different from the static, suffocating feeling I had left behind in Connecticut. It was the first time in months that I felt truly present. For the first time in ages, the weight of Robert's lies wasn't hanging over me. Instead, I was just Margaret, sitting in a new city, allowing herself the luxury of simply being. Dinner that night was at a small trattoria on the corner, where the waiter didn't speak much English, and I had to rely on gestures and smiles to communicate. It felt like a small victory, the simple act of ordering my own meal, of navigating a foreign country on my own. When the check arrived, I paid for the meal with euros from the airport exchange, calculating the tip carefully. Robert had always been the one to handle such things. But tonight, it was me, and for the first time in a long while, that felt empowering. After dinner, I returned to my apartment and began preparing for bed. I reflected on the woman I used to be, young, idealistic, and full of dreams of travel and adventure. Would I have appreciated Florence in my 20s as much as I did now, in my 70s, after a lifetime of experiences? The question lingered as I climbed into bed, knowing that the path I had walked in life had led me here, to this moment, to this new chapter. As sleep finally claimed me, I allowed myself to feel, for the first time in weeks, a sense of peace. A peacefulness born from being far away from everything I had once known, and from the possibility that, perhaps, the woman I had always wanted to be had been waiting all along. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through the shutters, casting soft golden rays across the room. For a moment, I forgot where I was. My mind still clung to the rhythms of home, the familiarity of Robert's presence, even if he hadn't been in the picture for a while. But then the memory of last night, of my first evening in Florence, washed over me. I was here, in this beautiful city, trying to rebuild something that had been shattered. The city was waking up around me. I could hear the soft murmur of voices below, the distant rumble of traffic, the clink of cups from a nearby cafe. It was different from home, where the silence had become unbearable. Here, life pulsed with energy, and I felt for the first time in months that I could breathe again. I had breakfast on the balcony, bread, cheese, and coffee, simple but satisfying. I gazed out over the street below, watching the locals go about their morning routines. The street was alive with activity, each person absorbed in their day. I felt strangely detached, like a quiet observer in a world that was not yet mine, but one I was beginning to know. After breakfast, I decided to explore. Gabriella, the woman who had rented me the apartment, had left me a map with some suggestions for things to see. Armed with the map and my phone's translation app, I set out into the winding streets of Florence. The city was everything I had hoped for, full of history, art, and a kind of timeless beauty that spoke to the soul. I found a small piazza with a fountain, where a group of older men were playing chess and women chatted on benches. I wandered through the narrow streets, letting the city unfold around me. There was no rush, no destination I needed to reach. The joy of simply walking, getting lost, then finding my way again, was liberating. Every corner revealed something new, a tiny chapel with frescoed walls, a workshop where a craftsman was restoring antique furniture, a bookstore with shelves crammed with old books. Around midday, I found myself near the Ponte Vecchio, the famous bridge that spans the Arno River. The narrow walkway was crowded with tourists, snapping photos and browsing the jewelry shops that lined the bridge. It was busy and vibrant, but still, I felt a sense of calm. It was as though the city had become a part of me, its beauty beginning to seep into my bones, easing the tension that had gripped me for so long. As I crossed the bridge, a small art school caught my eye. The sign in the window read, "Art for Everyone," and a schedule of classes was posted below. Without thinking, I walked inside. The reception area was small but welcoming, decorated with student artwork on the walls. A young woman behind the desk greeted me with a smile. "Can I help you?" she asked in accented English. "I'm interested in your classes," I said, the words surprising even me. "I'm visiting Florence for a while, and I thought I might try something new." She handed me a brochure with the course offerings: drawing, watercolor, oil painting, sculpture. I'd never considered art before, certainly not in a serious way. Robert had always been dismissive of my occasional interest in painting, suggesting that I focus on more practical hobbies. But now, with him gone, his voice no longer lingered in my head, telling me what I should and shouldn't do. I scanned the brochure quickly, my finger landing on the watercolor class for beginners. It was starting tomorrow, 3 hours long, all materials included. Before I knew it, I had signed up. I couldn't explain it. Something about it felt like the right thing to do. A small act of rebellion against the life I had been living, a step toward finding something I could truly enjoy for myself. The young receptionist seemed surprised by my quick decision, but processed my registration efficiently. "Wonderful," she said. "Class begins at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Wear clothes that can get a little messy." As I left the art school, a small flutter of excitement stirred in my chest. I, Margaret Wilson, was going to take a watercolor class in Florence. It was a simple thing, but it felt monumental. It was mine, and no one could take it from me. On my walk back to the apartment, I felt lighter, as though the weight of Robert's betrayal had been momentarily lifted. When I reached my building, Gabriella was outside watering the plants on the balcony. She smiled when she saw me. "Ah, Sonora Wilson. How was your first morning in Florence?" "Lovely," I said, smiling back. "I walked to the Ponte Vecchio, and I signed up for an art class." "Perfetto," she said with a nod of approval. "You must come for coffee tomorrow. My apartment, ground floor. We talk about good places, not for tourists." Her invitation was warm and unexpected. "I'd like that very much," I replied. That evening, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, reflecting on my day. It had been a good one. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something just for me. I was exploring a new city, taking a class, making small connections with people. There was a freedom in it, a sense of possibility that had been absent from my life for years. I checked my phone and saw messages from Jennifer, Tyler, and Sophia, all wishing me well. I responded briefly, telling them I had arrived safely and was settling in. Then, I leaned back in my chair, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The city's sounds, voices, scooters, music, floated up from below, creating a kind of symphony that felt strangely comforting. As I finished my wine and turned in for the night, I found myself thinking about the woman I had been before. Would I have come to Florence 50 years ago, as a young teacher, full of dreams and curiosity? Would I have appreciated the beauty of the city, or would I have been too focused on ticking off tourist destinations, rushing through everything without fully experiencing it? Now, at 70, I felt a deeper appreciation for the small moments. The simple joy of a well-prepared pasta dish, the sound of birds singing in the morning, the light that bathed the city in a soft glow. Maybe I had learned something along the way, after all. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, I was curious to find out. Tomorrow, I would go to my first watercolor class. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope. The next morning, I woke early, a small thrill buzzing in my chest as I prepared for my first watercolor class. I had no idea what to expect, but that was part of the excitement. My life had been so rigid, so controlled, for so long. Taking this class was my way of breaking free, even if just for a few hours. I arrived at the art school just before 10 a.m. and was greeted by the receptionist, who showed me to a cozy sunlit studio filled with wooden easels and tables scattered with colorful paint tubes, brushes, and sketchbooks. My instructor, Paolo, was an older man with a kind smile and halting English, but his enthusiasm for teaching was clear. He welcomed me warmly and made sure I had all the materials I needed. As the class began, I found myself struggling. My hands were awkward with the brush, and my first attempts at painting were clumsy, the colors bleeding together in ways I didn't intend. But Paolo was patient, encouraging me with gentle praise. "You have a good eye for composition," he said, his accent thick but reassuring. "Technique comes with practice. The eye for beauty, that is the gift." I wasn't sure I believed him, but I found myself looking forward to the next class, eager to improve. The physical act of painting, the focus required, provided a welcome distraction from the worries swirling in my mind about Robert, the trial, the mess he had left behind. After class, I walked through the city, letting the streets guide me. I passed familiar landmarks, the Duomo, the Arno River, and felt a sense of ownership over this place, like I was slowly becoming a part of it. There was a beauty in the unpredictability of it all. I could wander, get lost, and find my way again. It felt like a metaphor for the journey I was on, one where I didn't have all the answers, but I was learning to trust the process. I stopped at a small cafe near the river, sitting by the window with a cappuccino and a small pastry. It was something I'd never have done back home, but here, it felt right. I was no longer tied to a schedule, no longer catering to Robert's whims or trying to keep up with his ever-shifting story. For the first time, I felt like I was truly living for myself. Later that afternoon, I met Gabriella for coffee at a small cafe on her recommendation. She was lively and warm, her passion for Florence palpable as she shared her favorite spots in the city. "You must see the Boboli Gardens," she said, her hands sweeping through the air as she described the lush greenery and hidden corners of the park. "And the markets, of course, they are full of life. Not touristy at all." We chatted for hours, and by the end of our conversation, I felt a bond with her. Gabriella wasn't just a friendly neighbor. She was someone who had rebuilt her life after her own betrayal. She had been married for 27 years, only to find out that her husband had left her for his secretary. Yet, instead of crumbling, she had bought this building with her divorce settlement and turned it into a place for others to find a new beginning. She managed the apartments here herself and had built a new, independent life. Her story resonated deeply with me. "You see, Maggie," she said, her eyes twinkling, "life doesn't always give you what you expect, but it will give you what you need if you're willing to take it." Her words echoed in my mind as I walked back to my apartment later that evening. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I had choices now. I could build something new, just as Gabriella had done. I didn't need to live in Robert's shadow anymore. That night, I checked my phone and saw a message from Jennifer. She had called earlier, but I'd been out, and now there was a text waiting for me. "Mom, I need to talk. Something's come up with the investigation. Call me when you can." My stomach tightened as I read the message. My life in Florence had been a much-needed escape, but Robert's actions still loomed over me. Jennifer had been trying to shield me from the chaos at home, but I knew the storm was never far. I dialed her number, feeling a knot in my chest. "Mama," she answered quickly, her voice strained. "They've uncovered more. The FBI found evidence that Dad was running a Ponzi scheme. He had accounts all over the world, hiding assets from the IRS. I don't even know where to begin." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What does this mean for us, Jennifer?" "Honestly, I don't know. The fallout is going to be huge. They're looking at everyone. Clients, friends, even family. They're starting to interview more people now. They want to know if you had any idea what was going on. Have they contacted you yet?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. "No, they haven't. But I don't know what I'll say when they do." "You don't have to do anything right now, but I wanted you to know what's happening. They might call you soon." Jennifer paused, then added softly, "I wish you were here, Mom. It's getting messy." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we'd lost. The life I had known was gone. Robert's web of lies, the secrets, the betrayal, it was all coming to light. Jennifer and Tyler were in the middle of it, bearing the brunt of the fallout. And I was here in Florence, trying to piece together what was left of my own life. "I'm sorry, honey," I said, my voice thick. "I wish I could be there to help." "I know, Mom. I know. But you're where you need to be. Just don't let what's happening here stop you from moving forward. For once, do this for you." I wiped my eyes, feeling a mixture of guilt and gratitude. "I will, Jennifer. I promise." After we hung up, I sat on the balcony, staring out at the city as the lights flickered on, one by one, in the streets below. Florence felt like a safe haven, a place where I could breathe. But the truth was, I wasn't sure how much longer I could escape the reality of everything back home. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I wasn't supposed to run from it. Maybe I was supposed to confront it, in my own time, on my own terms. I didn't know how yet, but I was beginning to realize that it was my choice now. And I had the power to decide how I wanted the rest of my story to unfold. Tomorrow, I would take another step forward. I would go to class, volunteer, explore the city, and, most importantly, start to figure out who I was without Robert's shadow hanging over me. The path was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a future. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences, each one a small but significant step forward in my journey. I had signed up for a volunteer position at an after-school program for local teenagers, helping them practice their English. It was exactly what I needed, a way to connect with people, share my knowledge, and feel useful again. The children were eager to learn, and their youthful energy was infectious. It felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself I had buried under decades of domestic life. Twice a week, I walked to the community center, feeling a sense of purpose with each step. I taught basic conversation skills, explaining American culture and answering their endless questions. In return, they taught me about their lives in Florence, about their favorite places, the food they loved, and their dreams of traveling the world. I couldn't help but smile as they practiced their English, their excitement palpable. One afternoon, Lucia, a bright 16-year-old with dark curly hair and a quick smile, asked me a question that made me pause. Why did you come to Florence alone? No husband, no family. The question was innocent, but it caught me off guard. I'd been careful not to mention too much about my personal life, not wanting to burden them with the complexities of my situation. But Lucia's straightforwardness had a way of stripping away pretense. I'm here to discover myself, I said, the words surprising me. To see who I am outside of the roles I've played for so long. Lucia nodded sagely. My grandmother says you're never too old to find yourself. She started painting when she was 75. Now, she has a gallery show. Her words stayed with me long after the class ended. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like it. Florence had a way of teaching people to live fully, no matter their age. But it was the first time it felt like a call to action for me. Perhaps I wasn't too old to start something new, to embrace the unknown. Later that week, I received a call from Marcus, my lawyer in Connecticut. The investigation into Robert's financial crimes was expanding. They had uncovered more evidence of offshore accounts, fraud, and hidden assets. Robert's arrest had led to a tidal wave of discoveries, and my involvement in the case was far from over. He asked if I would be willing to participate in a video interview with the prosecution, to help them build their case. I hesitated but agreed. It was time to face the reality of everything that had happened, even if it was uncomfortable. As the days passed, I found myself spending more time in my watercolor class, losing myself in the process of painting. The act of capturing the world on paper, whether it was a street scene, a building, or a simple flower, became a form of therapy. I was no longer just Margaret Wilson, Robert's wife. I was simply Margaret, an artist learning her craft. One afternoon, after class, I decided to visit the Boboli Gardens. The park, with its lush greenery and winding paths, had become one of my favorite spots in Florence. I sat on a bench, sketchbook in hand, and started to capture the beauty of the surroundings. As I looked around, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly at peace. The weight of Robert's betrayal, the scandal, the uncertainty, all of it faded into the background as I focused on the simple act of creating. But even in moments of peace, the reality of my situation would always find its way in. The phone calls from Jennifer had become a routine, and each time we spoke, I could hear the stress in her voice. Robert's fraud had devastated not only my life but hers as well. One evening, we had a long conversation about the fallout. Jennifer was staying with Daniel's parents for the time being, trying to keep things as normal as possible for Tyler. But the press was relentless, and the FBI continued to question anyone connected to Robert. Jennifer had been interviewed again, this time about the accounts Robert had set up in her name. Mom, I don't know how much longer I can handle this, Jennifer admitted, her voice cracking with emotion. I just want it to be over. I know, honey, I said softly, my heart aching for her. But you're strong. You're handling it better than I ever could have expected. Jennifer sighed. I don't know about that. I'm angry, so angry. But mostly, I'm just tired. Tired of all the lies. Tired of the uncertainty. I don't even know what to believe anymore. I didn't know what to say. Robert's actions had torn apart so much, not just our family but the lives of everyone who had trusted him. Jennifer, Tyler, Daniel. They were all caught in the mess he had made, and I could only hope that somehow we would all find a way to heal. A few days later, Gabriella invited me to her apartment for coffee. She had become one of my few confidants in Florence, and her hospitality had been a lifeline. She had been through her own heartache, and somehow, that made her presence even more comforting. As we sat on her balcony, sipping espresso and chatting, I realized how much I had changed in such a short time. My mind wasn't constantly consumed with the legal proceedings or Robert's betrayal. Instead, I was learning to live in the moment, appreciating the beauty around me. Gabriella was talking about her latest venture, organizing a local art show when she paused and asked, Maggie, what do you want for your life now? What do you want to create for yourself? Her question took me by surprise. I'd been so focused on surviving the aftermath of Robert's betrayal that I hadn't thought much about what I wanted for myself. But sitting there in Florence, surrounded by warmth and light, I realized that I didn't have to settle for the life I had known. I could create something new, something just for me. I want to keep painting, I said quietly, and maybe teach. I want to use the skills I have, the things I've always loved, and build a life that's mine. For the first time, I feel like I have the freedom to do that. Gabriella smiled warmly. That is what Florence does for you. It shows you how to live again. Her words lingered with me as I left her apartment later that day. I had a new clarity, a renewed sense of purpose. Florence was teaching me to embrace this new chapter, to create from the raw materials of my past, my experiences, my emotions, and transform them into something meaningful. As I walked through the streets of Florence, the city I had come to love, I couldn't help but smile. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it, whatever it might bring. The weeks in Florence flew by. Every day felt like a new opportunity, a fresh chance to redefine myself, and to learn from the past without letting it dictate my future. My watercolor classes continued to be a touchstone, a peaceful rhythm in my otherwise chaotic life. I was no artist, but with each brushstroke, I found my confidence growing. Paolo, my instructor, would smile and tell me, "You have a good eye. Let the technique follow." His words, simple and encouraging, became a mantra as I learned not only to paint but to see the world around me in a new light. It was not just art that was transforming my life. It was also the connections I was making. The volunteer program had become a sanctuary for me. Helping the teenagers practice their English gave me a sense of purpose. They were open, eager, and full of life, their questions about American culture often providing moments of laughter. I shared pieces of my life with them, but mostly I let them teach me about their world. I felt like a teacher again, a role I had loved for decades but had set aside for years as I played the role of Robert's wife. One day, after a particularly fulfilling session, Lucia, the same girl who had asked me why I came to Florence alone, asked, "Do you have a dream, Miss Maggie? Before, you were a teacher. But now?" I smiled, a little surprised by the question. "Yes," I said slowly. "I think I always did, but it was buried for a long time. My dream is to keep teaching, to keep creating, and to never stop learning. And I think I'll finally get to do that now." "Good dream," Lucia said seriously. "Dreams, they don't go away. Just wait for the right time." Her words stayed with me, a quiet reminder that dreams can evolve, and they can always come back to you when you're ready. Florence had become more than just a temporary escape from the wreckage of my life. It was my canvas, my classroom, my sanctuary. But even in a city that seemed to embrace me with open arms, There were times when the weight of everything back home in Connecticut would creep in. Robert's plea deal had been finalized, and the prosecutors were pressing for restitution. There was so much about the case that still remained unresolved, and every time I spoke to Marcus, my lawyer, the legal complexities of the situation seemed to grow. Yet, something in me had shifted. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, I realized that I was no longer living in the shadow of Robert's lies. I had come to Florence looking for answers, but what I had found instead was peace. I was rediscovering the parts of myself that had been lost over the years. The woman who loved to teach, who wanted to explore, who had dreams bigger than a life defined by someone else's decisions. That evening, I received a message from Jennifer. It was an image of her and Olivia, sitting in a cafe together, the two women smiling tentatively at the camera. The caption read simply, "New connections, complicated, but good." I stared at the photo for a long time, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. This wasn't how I had envisioned my family, but it was the family I had now. And I could see the possibility for healing, for new bonds to form where old ones had been shattered. Jennifer and Olivia were connecting, talking through the complexities of their shared history with Robert. Jennifer had called me after their meeting, sounding surprisingly upbeat. "I think it's going to be okay, Mom," she said. "We're starting to understand each other. Olivia's not like Dad at all, but she's a good person." "I'm glad, honey," I replied, my heart swelling with hope. "You deserve peace. You all do." That conversation marked a turning point for me. I no longer saw myself as a victim of Robert's betrayals but as a survivor, someone who was learning to rebuild and reconnect, not just with others, but with myself. I realized that the freedom I was seeking wasn't just about distance from Robert. It was about releasing the anger, the hurt, the betrayal that had kept me tethered to a past I couldn't change. It was about choosing to live the life I wanted, on my terms. Gabriella had continued to be a steady presence in my life. One afternoon, as we walked through the narrow cobblestone streets, she asked, "Maggie, have you decided what you want to do with your life now?" I stopped, looking at the beauty around me. The art, the people, the history, the light. "I think I'm starting to figure it out," I said slowly. "I want to keep painting. Maybe teach again. And I want to explore other places. Maybe stay here for a while longer. Just live." Gabriella nodded. "Life is for living, Maggie. Don't wait for permission." And with that simple encouragement, I felt a weight lift off me. For the first time in decades, I didn't need anyone's permission to live for myself. I had spent so many years wrapped in Robert's shadow, living his life, fulfilling his dreams, that I had forgotten how to dream for myself. But now, in Florence, I was learning to reclaim my own story, my own path forward. The following week, I met with the director of the adult education program at the community center, and they had offered me a chance to help develop a curriculum for local learners. It was an opportunity to use my teaching experience in a new way, one that felt both exciting and fulfilling. I had also decided to extend my stay in Florence, at least for another 6 months. The thought of going back to Connecticut felt like too much too soon. Florence had become a place where I could breathe, where I could grow, and where I could be true to myself. The decision to extend my lease was a simple one. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. For the first time in a long time, I was making choices that were mine alone. The days turned into weeks, and I began to feel more at home in Florence. I continued with my painting, my volunteer work, and my teaching. I had even started to make plans to exhibit my watercolors. It wasn't just about the work, it was about the process, the joy of creation, the act of pouring my emotions onto a canvas and finding peace in the strokes. I also found myself reflecting on the unexpected friendships I was making. Diane, the retired professor from California, had become a close friend. We met regularly for coffee, sharing stories of our lives, our losses, and our hopes for the future. Diane had moved to Florence to honor the dream she had shared with her late wife, and I found her strength inspiring. It reminded me that, sometimes, when life pulls everything from you, you can still find a way to rebuild. One afternoon, as we sat in a small cafe near the Arno, Diane asked me, "Do you think you'll go back to Connecticut?" I paused, considering the question. Maybe. But not right now. I think I need to stay here a bit longer. Florence is where I've found myself again. I'm not ready to leave this chapter just yet. Diane smiled softly. That's the best answer. When you're ready, you'll know. Just don't rush it. As the months passed, I found myself thinking more and more about the future, not with dread or uncertainty, but with anticipation. There were still many unanswered questions, especially regarding Robert's case, but they no longer consumed me. I was no longer defined by his actions, by his betrayals. I was Margaret, a woman discovering who she was meant to be, and that was enough. I may have come to Florence broken, a woman reeling from the loss of everything she thought she knew. But I was leaving Florence whole, empowered by the freedom to choose my own future. The sun set over the city one last time as I sat on my balcony, the key to a new life hanging around my neck. The future, uncertain as it was, had never looked more promising. I had finally found the courage to unlock the door to my own freedom.